Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. As always, as it's always been, welcome back, and I'm so happy to have you back here again for a new episode. And if you are new here, hello and welcome. Why don't you stick around to see what kind of shocking true crime case I have for you today. And also please do stick around and do subscribe to the channel for more true crime content. Oh man, how long has it been? 4 months? It's been 4 or 5 months. I know, I feel like a lot of you guys are going to kill me for being gone for so long, but unfortunately it couldn't be helped. It just could not be helped. I was going through a lot, and a lot of my plans had to be put on hold. I had to take this time off to just, I don't know, to just try to get everything together, you know? But now I do believe that I'm at a space where I can get back and get the ball rolling again and back to my work, back to the channel. So before we start, please do allow me to apologize for being gone for so long, without even a single hint, without even a single word. I know it's been too long. So to those of you who are still here, who haven't left, thank you. Thank you for staying. Thank you for coming back. And to those of you who are new, thank you for coming to my channel. I hope you will be pleased with the content that I'm going to provide for you this year. All right then, now that we have settled that part, allow me to get into the case that I have for you this week. And the case we're going to be talking about is all the way from England. And we're going to be talking about a well-known author. This woman was a well-known author. Her name is Helen Bailey. We're going to be talking about the heartbreaking case of Helen Bailey. So sit back, relax, and let me tell you all about the story of Helen Bailey. Helen Bailey was born on August 22nd in 1964, and she was born in Northumberland in England. And like I mentioned, she was an author. So she would often write about the experiences that she had in school, and even when she was a young girl, she enjoyed writing. As a matter of fact, she was the kind of girl who would also daydream about a lot of things except the lessons in school. She would just stare out the window and daydream, and then when she gets home, she would do nothing but write about whatever was in her mind, whatever she was thinking about, or whatever happened at school that day. So she always enjoyed writing from a very young age. Helen got a degree in physiology at the London University. She actually intended to become a forensic scientist, but when she got into it and started studying, she started realizing that it wasn't really for her. Like, she doesn't really want to be a forensic scientist. So then that's when she changed the degree. Then at some point, Helen changed careers once again, and this time she got into the media industry, and she started working on licensing and marketing campaigns such as Rugrats and Garfield, as well as for Nintendo characters. Then in 1996, she met a man named John Sinfield while she was working as a temporary secretary, and John at the time was the head of a licensing rights company. And they started hitting things off the more they spent time together, and John was immediately taken over by Helen, and he became very supportive of what she did. He became very supportive of her talent of writing, and he would often encourage her to keep on writing more and keep on working on improving this talent of hers of writing books. Helen went on to write 5 books for a series known as the Crazy World of Electra Brown series, and the first book of the series was Life at the Shallow End, which she wrote in 2008, and then again in 2008 she wrote Out of My Depth, and then a year later in 2009 she wrote Swimming Against the Tide, and then again in 2009 she wrote the 4th book of the series known as Taking the Plunge, and then finally in 2010 she wrote the final book of the series known as Falling Hook, Line, and Sinker. So these were the 5 books that she wrote for the series known as the Crazy World of Electra Brown series. In her entire writing career, Helen had written 22 books of picture stories, adult fiction, and short stories as well. And that is quite an achievement. And she also got nominated for a lot of awards in her career. So like I mentioned, she was quite an accomplished author. But unfortunately in 2011, Helen ended up losing her husband John in February when they were out on holiday in Barbados, when John unfortunately drowned while swimming at the beach. On that day, day, Helen and her husband went to the beach for a relaxing day, and so while she was relaxing at the beach, John decided to go into the ocean for a swim, and just moments later, Helen saw her husband struggling in the ocean, flailing his arms and bobbing up and down, so she obviously saw that something was wrong with John, and as soon as she noticed, she went to go get some help, but unfortunately it arrived too late, and she had to watch her husband drowned to death. And after that, Helen had to spend the next week or two still in Barbados with the thought that she had just lost her husband in such a painful way. So the rest of this holiday turned into a complete nightmare for her, and she also had to get the proper paperwork done to ensure that John's body gets taken home so he can be given a proper burial. And when it was time for her to go back home, she also had to take his luggage as well. So imagine that, having to go home with your husband's luggage and his body, no less. So you can tell that she was in quite a traumatic moment, quite in a painful moment at that time. At this point, Helen and John had been married for well over a decade, so you can imagine the kind of effect this had on her. And to cope with the effects of her grief, she opened up a blog and started writing about her experience, and she also did this so that other people can come and read and also share what they have gone through in their grief experience. And this blogging website of hers was known as Planet Grief. In 2015, Helen also ended up writing a book, an adult book, known as When Bad Things Happen in Good Bikinis, and it was also talking about still her experience with the loss of her husband, and she also started talking about her newfound relationship with a man named Ian Stewart, whom she met in October of 2011, just about 7 months after John died. Ian was also around Helen's age at that time, and he had also just recently lost his wife, with whom he had 2 sons who were already adults at this point. They started bonding over their experiences from time to time, and this ended up leading to them spending a lot of time together, going out for coffee quite often, and this ended up leading to them falling for each other over time. And then at some point they decided to move in together, but Ian wasn't really a fan of London, and he was more of a fan of the countryside, so they decided to move to Royston instead, and they moved in with Ian's 2 adult sons as well as Helen's dog, which was named Boris. And then soon after this, Helen and Ian got engaged, and everything seemed to be happening quite perfectly. So you could say that it was like Helen was getting a second chance at happiness once again after meeting Ian. But then on April 15th in 2016, the police received a call from Ian, and he wanted to report a missing person. And of course, this missing person was his fiance Helen. On April 11th in 2016, Helen was last seen walking her dog Boris before she went missing. Ian said that there was a note that was also left behind, and it said that Helen was going to stay at the family home in Maidstone, Kent, and she did not want to be disturbed. Apparently, she needed some space to focus on a new book that she was writing, so she wanted to stay by herself at the home. But when this holiday home was checked out, there was no sign that Helen was ever there. And according to her mother and her brother, her disappearance was quite strange, to say the least, because even though Helen was known to sometimes, isolate herself and take some time away from people, maybe to focus on work, she would still keep in contact with the people that were closest to her. She wouldn't just ghost everyone like she did at this moment. So according to Helen's family, this disappearance was definitely out of character for her, and even the police said that there's something that seemed a little bit off about Helen going missing. And for weeks after Helen went missing, Ian and her family were working day and night, reaching out to the public, talking to anyone they could, trying to get people to just come up with any information that could possibly lead them to finding Helen. And while they were doing that, the police were also still searching for clues. And initially the police believed that Helen disappeared on her own. She disappeared on her own will. And they supported this theory based on the blog posts that they saw where she was talking about the difficulties that she was facing in her first marriage with John. And in one of those posts, she wrote about how difficult sometimes it was being in that marriage, and how she would often look at the door and and daydream about one day just walking out of it with her entire luggage and never coming back. So they believed that she had intended to disappear this time around, and she actually did it, even though there weren't any signs, any clear signs of any issues in her relationship with Ian. And at this point, there was no single trace of Helen. There was no sighting of her, or even any digital or financial footprint which could have told the police where she could have gone. And according to investigators, she hadn't accessed any of her bank accounts. So this was a bit strange because she also didn't take out any large sum of money which she could have used or needed if she was intending on disappearing for a very long time or permanently. So a lot of things were not adding up here. Investigators also had no evidence that there could have been anything bad that could have happened to her, and they also had no evidence to support that maybe someone else could have been involved in her disappearance. And even though they believed that Helen could have disappeared on her own free will, they still didn't have any evidence to support this as well, so these were merely just speculations at this point. And you know, the police were having quite a hard time with this case. They couldn't find any trace, like I said, of what happened to Helen. They couldn't find any lead whatsoever, and they searched quite extensively for her. They searched the neighborhoods, interviewed her friends and family multiple times. They even searched her neighbors' homes to see if maybe there could have been any clue of what could have happened to her. They even searched the nearby woods to see if maybe she couldn't have ended up in the woods and gotten lost and something could have happened to her there. But still, they couldn't find anything. You know, a few weeks after she went missing, Ian was not doing so well, and it was quite visible that he wasn't coping with the disappearance of his fiance. It was said that he wasn't keeping up with his hygiene, he was letting his beard grow out of control, he was just wearing he was just not keeping up with his own personal well-being because he just wasn't coping with the disappearance of his partner. And a lot of people described him as looking empty and lost and also spaced out. And going back to the investigation, the police were trying to trace Helen's phone, and maybe they thought that they could use it to find her. But this seemed to be a lot more challenging than they thought, because now the phone had been turned off, so they couldn't use any cell towers to try to find out where she could possibly be. Then they had the idea to check her Wi-Fi. They wanted to see if maybe any of her electronic devices could have connected to it. And when they did this, they actually found something. On April 16th in 2016, 5 days after she went missing, her phone actually connected to the Wi-Fi in their holiday home in Maidstone, where she was supposedly going, according to the note that Ian said she left behind. So now the investigators were thinking that maybe she actually had been in that home, and when they went to go check on her at that specific time, she just wasn't around at the time. So they went back to the holiday home to try to see if she was still there, but still when they got there still was no sign to indicate that she ever was at that house. So now they thought maybe her phone automatically connected to the Wi-Fi when she was driving past the area, or maybe when she was walking by, but this ended up giving them a lot of hope that, you know what, she could still be out there and they could still find her. So now the investigation was starting to kick back into high gear once again. So now the police started believing that maybe Helen did not want to be found. And again, I think this goes back to their theory that she could have disappeared on her own free will. But this time they believed that maybe she didn't want to be found. So now for some reason they believed that maybe she just wanted to leave everything and everyone behind. So with that in mind, they pleaded to the public for any information that they might know of where she was, and they still believed that she was out there. They gave out hints like she could be using a fake ID and she could be trying to stay under the radar, not wanting to be found. They appealed to hotels, B&Bs, and also service stations for any information to look out for her in case she might want to take refuge in any one of them. And then they went back to her financial records, her banking records, to try to search for any more clues. And this time around, they were not expecting to find what they found. So Helen and Ian had separate bank accounts, their own personal bank accounts, but they also had a joint bank account. So something wasn't really making sense when they looked at these banking records, but I will talk about this a little bit later on in the video, so keep that in mind. Then another thing they found when they looked at these banking records, they found out that a transaction had been made from Helen's bank account after she went missing, and it was made to renew an Arsenal Football Club season ticket, but it was not in Helen's name, it was in Ian's name. So this seemed kind of weird to the investigators, so they decided to go back to the house to question Ian about this, but when they got there, Ian was nowhere to be found. And when they interviewed friends and family about where he could be, they told the investigators that Ian decided to go on holiday even though the search for Helen was still going on. And it wasn't really a last-minute kind of thing. This had been planned months in advance before she even went missing, and it was a holiday trip for both him and Helen. But now Ian obviously decided to go by himself, even though the search for his partner was still going on. So now with all this information in mind, the investigators decided to look at this case from a different angle. This was no longer a missing person case, it was now being looked at as a murder inquiry. Then on June 11th, when Ian finally got back from this long holiday, the investigators knew about it, and as soon as they did, they went back to the house and Ian was arrested on suspicion of murder and disposing of a body. But the police still had to find evidence to prove that this was indeed a murder case, and they had to do that by finding a body. So now they had to interview everyone they questioned before, but this time they were asking different questions. And one of the people they interviewed was the neighbor of Helen and Ian's, and this time she told them that there was actually something that she remembered that she didn't tell them the first time around when they spoke to her. She said that on the morning when Helen went missing, she was busy in her home doing some taxes, and while she was busy, she heard some loud banging noises coming from Ian and Helen's home, and it kept on happening over a couple of times. So when she went to her window to try to see what's happening, the loud banging stopped, and since it did stop, she never thought about it again, and she decided to just take it out of her mind. And when the police questioned Ian about the day she went missing, he told them that on that morning he had a doctor's appointment, but he couldn't go in the morning because he started having some car troubles, and because of that he called the doctor's office to postpone his appointment, and they changed it to 3 p.m. on that very same day. And then when the police went to the office to ask about this, the doctor said that Ian did come, but he seemed a little bit distant, a little bit far away. And then after this, Ian went to the local tip, which is a place in the UK whereby people can just go and drop off some trash that was too much or too big for them to get rid of on their own. So Ian went there and he wanted to get rid of a double duvet, and so he did that. Then after that, he went to go meet up with a solicitor to go talk about one of Helen's properties in Newcastle. And apparently, he really wanted to sell this property, and the solicitor described him as being very aggressive about it, even though he was being told that the property could not be sold without Helen's presence or without her permission. And then after this, Ian said that's when he went home, and that's when he realized that Helen was not at home. And that's also when he found that note that said that Helen was going to be spending some time at their family home. After this, it's not really known what Ian did for the rest of the day, but later on at night, it is known that he spent some time with his son and they went to go get some takeouts. And then 2 days after Helen went missing, that's when people started realizing that she was a bit too absent. So they were texting her and they were calling her, but they just couldn't seem to get a hold of her. Helen's brother also contacted Helen to try to see if she's okay, but that's when he also couldn't find her. And then he contacted Ian to ask about this, and that's when Ian told him that she decided to go to Maidstone to be by herself. But when her brother went to go check out the place, that's also when he couldn't find her, like everybody else couldn't find her. So while he was still in Maidstone in Kent, he wanted to ask the people in the neighborhoods if they had seen any sign of her, but no one could ever recall seeing Helen in Kent. It's like she was never there. And then it took 2 more days before Ian even thought of reporting Helen missing, so meaning she was missing for a total of 4 days before the police knew about her disappearance. Then the police decided to revisit the phone call that Ian made when he was reporting Helen missing, and during this phone call they were asking him general questions about Helen. They were asking about the kind of things that any person would know about their partner if they've been together for a few years. But for some reason, Ian just couldn't answer any of these questions. He was having a hard time trying to remember even the smallest of details about Helen. Ian also told the investigators that when Helen went missing, he was going through a lot. He wasn't coping with any of it. So he decided to launch his own investigation to try to go find her. And he said he did this because of that note that said that she was in Maidstone. A note that no one has ever even seen, by the way. So he went to Maidstone, he went to Kent, but this is when Helen's phone automatically connected to the Wi-Fi. So this means that Ian had Helen's phone after she went missing. So at this point, like I said, this was no longer a missing person case. It was now a murder inquiry. So now the investigators decided to look at Helen's will to see how her properties have been divided, how her assets have been divided among her family and friends. And as soon as they did this, it started becoming very clear what the motive would have been if Ian had been involved in this. It started being very clear what his actual reasons would have been. Most of what she owned, millions, would have gone to Ian. Remember, she was a successful author and also had various properties under her name, and her estate was also worth millions, and all of this would have went to Ian. So now it had been 3 months since Helen went missing. And again, like I said, Ian had been arrested on suspicion of her murder and disposing of her body. But when Ian was being interrogated, he wasn't saying a single word. He was not even showing any emotion or any reaction. And because of this, the police knew that by law in the UK, they had 96 hours to hold him in custody while questioning him without any concrete evidence to keep him in custody. So if they lost that 96 hours without a solid confession or without any solid evidence, they would have had to let him go. So now the investigators got together and once again, they started to brainstorm everything. They started to go over every single piece of evidence that they had thus far. And as they were discussing, one of them remembered that on the day they went to arrest Ian, he was acting a little bit weird. So they decided to revisit the police body cam footage of that day to analyze it and see exactly what was going on. And when they did this, they realized that Ian was quite fixated on the garage, and he kept on asking repeatedly why the garage doors were open, like he didn't like the fact that they were open. So now the police decided to go back to search the property once again. And again, it was a very big place to search. So while they were doing this, the neighbor of Helen and Ian, the one they talked to in the beginning, came out and started asking what exactly they were doing, because the equipment that they were using was quite loud and it would keep her up at night, because some of these searches would go on for a very long time. And after one of the officers told her that they were looking for something related to the case, that's when she told them about a cesspit beneath the garage. And the police had no idea about this. They only knew about a septic tank that was on the property, and they had intended to drain it to see what was inside. But they had no idea that there was an entire cesspit beneath the garage. So now investigators intended to search inside the cesspit, and once they looked into it, it only took about 2 hours before they ended up finding the decomposing body of Helen Bailey. And not only that, they also found the decomposing body of her dog, Boris. Helen's body was of course taken to the autopsy to be analyzed, and the cause of her death was determined to be suffocation. However, they could not determine if she suffocated while in the cesspit or if she was suffocated before being thrown into the cesspit. And to be honest with you, I cannot decide which one is worse. And the same can be said for Helen's dog as well. It could not be identified what the cause of his death was. Ian remained in custody, and then he appeared in court on July 19th in 2016. Then on October 12th, he pleaded not guilty to the charges laid against him, and so his trial was set for January of 2017. During the trial, the prosecution alleged that Ian drugged Helen with sleeping pills for several months before he suffocated her. Then it was also alleged that maybe she was still even alive when she was thrown into the cesspit. Then the prosecution also talked about the fact that he went to their holiday home in Maidstone, Kent after she went missing, and he was in possession of her phone, which connected to the Wi-Fi. So this had to have been evidence that he had something to do with this. Helen's brother also testified in the trial, and he talked about a moment when Helen joked about the cesspit that it would be the perfect place to hide a body, and she said this while Ian was around and they were all sitting together, and Ian would have heard this, and maybe he could have used it as the dumping place for the body after hearing Helen say that it could be the perfect place to hide a body. The members of the jury were also given the opportunity to visit the place where Helen's body was found. Then the jury also heard from the prosecution that there was a time when Ian attempted to sell one of Helen's properties, and he tried to do this twice. If you remember, earlier on in the video I did mention that investigators found something strange when they looked at the financial records of Helen. It was discovered that Ian actually increased the standing order to transfer money from Helen's bank account into their joint bank account, and he increased this order from £400 to £4,000 per month. The jury also learned that this man would have been the beneficiary of Helen's £3.4 million estate, and he would have also been the beneficiary of quite a large sum of insurance money. Helen's mother also testified that her daughter was worried that she was sleeping quite a lot lately, and she was worried about her state of mind. And after this, the prosecution revealed that the autopsy also revealed that there were traces of anti-insomnia medication that was found in Helen's body. And just a few weeks before she died, she also made internet searches such as "I'm so tired, falling asleep at work," and also "Why am I so tired all the time?" And the autopsy also revealed that these sleeping pills couldn't just be bought by anyone. They had to be taken by prescription, and this prescription was in Ian's name. So now the prosecution was definitely convinced that he could have been drugging her the entire time. When it came time for Ian Stewart to defend himself, he said that both Helen and Boris were kidnapped by two men named Joe and Nick on April 11th in 2016. And he also said that the reason he didn't say anything to the police about this for about 4 days was because he was worried about their safety, because these men, Joe and Nick, demanded £500,000 for Helen and Boris to be returned safely. And at some point he even gave the description of these two men, and the prosecution looked at this description, and after that these men were found. One was Joe Capullo and the other one was Nick Cook. Nick was Ian's next door neighbor, and Joe was a man that Ian knew from Bassingbourn. However, Ian denied that these men were the ones that he was talking about. During the closing statement, the prosecutor, Stewart, said that the version of events given by Ian were quite absurd, and he also said that Ian had grossly deceived Helen. He continued to say that Helen was overwhelmed by something called love bombing, which is an attempt to influence a person by demonstrations of attention and affection, and it can be used for positive or negative purposes. And it has also been identified by psychologists as part of a cycle of abuse. The defense, on the other hand, dismissed these claims and called them speculative theories by the prosecution. The defense continued to ask, what possible motive could Ian have to murder his partner? But I think it's quite obvious to all of us at this point that this man wanted to do this for financial gain. But in the end, on February 22nd in 2017, the jury came back with a guilty verdict, and Ian Stewart was found guilty of the murder of Helen Bailey, and he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 34 years. Then after Ian was convicted, there were now suspicions about about the death of his first wife, Diane Stewart. And investigators decided to go back to reopen the investigation into her death, and they found out that from her death, Ian had gained a life insurance payout of £30,000. And then on August of 2018, Ian was arrested again, and he was questioned this time for the death of his first wife, Diane. And then after further investigations, he was also charged for the murder of Diane. Ian appeared in court for Diane's murder on July 6th in 2020. And then in November of 2021, he pleaded not guilty to the charges. Then on the 9th of February in 2022, Ian was found guilty of the murder of his first wife, Diane, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But he ended up appealing the sentence, and it was reduced to a minimum of 35 years in prison. So I think it's pretty obvious now to all of us, guys, that the motive even behind Diane's murder as well was to gain some money out of it, that life insurance money. So personally, I am glad that this guy was caught and he was arrested, and he's going to spend the rest of his life in prison, because who knows, had he gotten away with this, had he gotten away with Helen's murder and with Diane's murder, who knows, he would have found the next woman to do the same thing too, and he would have continued to do this for God knows how long. So let's just be glad that he was finally caught and put to justice. But yeah, guys, that was the heartbreaking case, the sad case of Helen Bailey. This poor woman thought that she had gotten a second chance at happiness, that it was her second chance to be in love again, to be happy again, but she had no idea that the man who came into her life was nothing but a monster, a greedy, selfish monster. So I really hope that she, Boris, and Diane as well are resting in peace now that justice has been served in their name. And that is all that I have for you guys on this case. Please do let me know what you think about it in the comments. And if you enjoyed watching, please do me a big favor and leave the video a thumbs up so my content can reach out to more people. I really would appreciate that. And also thank you guys for hanging out with me today. As always, I do appreciate you taking time out of your day to support my content. And again, if you are new here, please do subscribe to the channel for more true crime content. That being said, I will see you guys in the next episode, and it is absolutely good to be back. So until then, take care of yourselves, enjoy the rest of your day, and cheers.